9. Anastasia Kvitska. Igor Kvitska is a former Ukrainian member of parliament, MP, and a wealthy uranium tycoon. He has had close business ties with the country's Minister of the Interior, Arsen Avakov, since the early 1990s. In late March, about a month after Russia invaded Ukraine, news headlines reported that Kvitska's glamorous wife, Anastasia Kvitska, crossed the border into Hungary. She went on foot with tens of millions of dollars in cash in several suitcases. She was traveling with her mother and 2 Hungarian men. Reports claim that Hungarian customs officials discovered the money, mostly in euros and US dollars, after Anastasia failed to declare it while entering the country at a refugee checkpoint. As a result, officials opened a criminal investigation into the suspiciously sizable sum of cash. In addition, many officials are now calling for an inquiry into the conduct of Ukrainian Border Patrol agents. Authorities suspect them of turning a blind eye to the large amounts of money that have been leaving the country in recent months. A businessman from Kyiv named Seyar Kushatov revealed the Kvitska incident. He accused customs officers of taking bribes from people for carrying cash out of Ukraine. Kushatov told the press that this also goes on in other countries. He adds that the names of border agents who will take part are well known among the elite few who have the funds they need to smuggle them from one place to another. 8. Ray Nagin. Ray Nagin was the mayor of New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina struck the city in August 2005. Months later, as devastated local communities tried to rebuild, Nagin was busy operating a bribery and kickback scheme. The scam benefited him financially in exchange for favoritism towards specific individuals and businesses vying for construction and other contracts. The fraud came at the cost of the city coffers and its residents and provided Nagin with money, personal services, free travel, and more. His dirty deeds went unnoticed for some time. He was re-elected for a second term as mayor the following year in 2006. Then in 2009, the public and law enforcement caught on to Nagin's corruption. That year, a Times-Picayune journalist alleged that the mayor's friend, Greg Meffett, paid for Nagin's plane ticket to a 2004 trip to Hawaii using a contractor's credit card. It soon came to light that Nagin had taken many other free trips that were paid for by a company owned by city vendor Mark St. Pierre. Prosecutors accused at least 3 individuals of bribing a public official for their substantial contributions to Nagin's mayoral campaign and pocketbook. In the meantime, authorities investigated Nagin for deleting numerous emails. They used many against him in a federal criminal trial. The courts convicted him on 20 of 21 corruption-related charges, including wire fraud, conspiracy, bribery, money laundering, filing false tax returns, and more. A judge sentenced him to 10 years at a prison camp in Texarkana, Texas, but they released him in early 2020 because of the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Although Nagin was required to serve some time under house arrest, it was probably a welcomed change for the 63-year-old, who at least gets to live in comfort despite his restrictions. 7. Commercial court corruption. Police in the tiny Balkan country of Montenegro recently arrested nearly a dozen officials, including the president of the country's commercial court, Blazo Jovanic, for allegedly running a criminal organization and abusing their positions of office. The case began when the Montenegrin special state prosecutor suspected the group of illicit activity. The arrest marked a significant milestone for Prime Minister Dritan Abazovic, who previously said that he was dedicated to fighting the country's ongoing problems with organized crime. He told the media that Montenegro has a history of corrupt authorities looting the public coffers and committing immoral deeds. Abazovic said it was time to hold people responsible for their participation in these crimes. Before the arrest, authorities searched Jovanic's office while officers stood guard outside the court building where he was headquartered. Police declined to comment on the case, but the press reported that Jovanic had founded a criminal organization that had drained the public coffers of tens of millions of euros, putting enormous, needless strain on the state's already struggling economy. Jovanic has been involved in government for years. He was a judge before he became the first elected head of the commercial court in 2014, and he was re-elected 5 years later. The disgraced official has long-standing ties to the country's president, Milo Djukanovic, and to the country's Democratic Party of Socialists, DPS. It's unclear how far back his corruption activities go. The Montenegrin government is fraught with morally questionable behavior, but there seems to be a growing number of officials intent on bringing these harmful activities to an end. 6. Gajik Kakatrian. The U.S. Justice Department is making moves to try seizing a multi-million-dollar Los Angeles mansion that they claim was purchased with the money paid to a politician. They're accusing former Armenian Finance Minister Gajik Kakatrian of using ill-gotten funds to buy the French chalet-style home in the prestigious Holmby Hills neighborhood for $63.5 million. He purchased the sprawling 33,652 square foot mansion in 2011. But it wasn't until recently that the Justice Department revealed that Kakatrian and his two sons allegedly funded the purchase with money they received from a businessman named Sidrak Arustamyan for favorable tax treatment. Of course, this violates Armenian law, and the U.S. feds seem more than happy to try holding Kakatrian responsible for his corrupt dealings. The homeowner recently put the mansion on the market, and viewings are still being held despite ongoing legal scrutiny. It's near the Playboy Mansion and has 11 bedrooms, 24 bathrooms, a theater, pool, wine cellar, and maid's quarters. Real estate agency Hilton and Highland told the Los Angeles Times that even though the law has gotten involved, the home can still be sold as long as the seller and the Justice Department agree on a sale price after receiving an offer. Neither Kakatrian, Arustamyan, nor anyone representing them has commented, and the investigation is ongoing. 5. Roger Ng. 49-year-old Roger Ng is a former Goldman Sachs executive who recently went down in history for helping to mastermind one of the biggest financial fraud schemes in history. Before he went rogue, he was the bank's top investor in Malaysia. From 2009 to 2015, he helped embezzle as much as $4.5 billion raised through 1MDB, a sovereign wealth fund that helped the country's poor. The money was diverted to government officials, bankers, and other associates of the scam, leaving just $1.5 billion to benefit Malaysia's impoverished civilians. Some funds went to Malaysian playboy Ho Lo, who bought lavish apartments, yachts, expensive artwork, and other frivolous luxury goods. Goldman Sachs ended up paying nearly $3 billion in fines in the U.S. and almost $4 billion to the Malaysian government. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Justice prosecuted Ng for his role in the scheme. His former boss, Tim Leisner, who had pleaded guilty to similar charges in 2018, testified against Ng at his trial. Defense lawyers poked some holes in Leisner's credibility, but a jury ultimately found Ng guilty of conspiring to launder money and violating an anti-corruption law. He now faces up to 30 years in federal prison. 4. Franois and Penelope Fillon. After serving as French Prime Minister from 2007 to 2012 under President Nicolas Sarkozy, Franois Charles Armand Fillon ran for president in 2017. But his campaign plummeted when allegations of corruption surfaced against Fillon. In a scandal known as Penelope Gate, he was accused of setting his wife Penelope up with high-paying fake jobs. Mrs. Fillon allegedly received more than $842,060 over 15 years while working, but not really, as her husband and his stand-in, Marc Juland's parliamentary assistant and a literary assistant. Fillon continued his candidacy even after falling under legal scrutiny despite promises to quit the campaign if he was prosecuted. He accused his competition of spreading rumors, but there's no evidence that this was ever the case. Instead, authorities carried out search warrants and a lengthy investigation, and in 2020, Fillon went on trial. He was convicted of fraud and misuse of funds later that year and was sentenced to 5 years in prison with 3 years suspended. Fillon appealed, but the court upheld his conviction. As a result, he's barred from holding public office for a decade, and Penelope also received a prison sentence. In addition, the former president, his wife, and Juland were ordered to repay over $1,055,000 to the French government. 3. The Odebrecht Scandal. Some of Latin America's most important infrastructure projects were built by the Brazilian-based construction giant Grupo Odebrecht. Few people outside the region have ever heard of the company, which started as a small family-owned business during the 1940s. But it grew rapidly and gained a sizable multinational presence. At its peak in 2010, Odebrecht had around 181,000 employees across 21 countries. It also donates large sums of money to Brazilian politicians. It is one of the dozens of companies that have been accused of bribing high-ranking officials for contracts with the petroleum corporation Petrobras. Marcelo Odebrecht, the company's executive and the grandson of its founder, was arrested in connection with the scandal in 2015. Dozens more arrests of other company officials followed. As things currently stand, detectives are investigating suspected bribery in 10 countries, including Argentina, Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, and Venezuela. As part of a leniency deal reached with U.S. and Swiss authorities in 2016, Odebrecht agreed to pay $2.6 billion in fines in the largest ever settlement. In addition, the company has tried to reach agreements with other governments to settle cases, helping to keep its construction rights in those countries. Several Odebrecht executives have fessed up to their roles in the massive scheme. The biggest confession came from former boss Marcelo Odebrecht, who admitted to illegally donating $48 million to Brazilian presidential candidates Dilma Rousseff and Michel Temer in 2014. But not all confessions are reliable because confessing often leads to a cozy deal with prosecutors, and investigators have their work cut out to determine what's true and what's not. Some Petrobras executives involved in the scandal have already reached favorable plea bargains that allow them to serve out their sentences at home rather than behind bars. But their lives are highly restricted, and house arrest is anything but a vacation. 2. Young Thug and Gunna. Prosecutors in Fulton County, Georgia, are accusing Atlanta-based rappers Young Thug and Gunna of co-founding a violent street gang that committed many carjackings, shootings, and murders over a decade. They cited lyrics from the musicians' songs as evidence of their alleged crimes in an 88-page indictment that claims the men targeted other high-profile rappers. Young Thug, whose legal name is Jeffrey Lamar Williams, rose to stardom in 2019 when he wrote a song with Childish Gambino called "This Is America." According to prosecutors, the song became the first hip-hop track to win the Song of the Year Grammy. By then, he was already well into his gang life, who alleged that Young Thug and two co-conspirators founded the street gang Young Slime Life, or YSL, in 2012. The gang has connections to the notorious Bloods and is infamous for committing brutal acts of violence. Young Thug's lawyer, Brian Steele, maintains his client's innocence and says that Williams has committed no crime whatsoever. Gunna turned himself into the Fulton County Jail after Young Thug's arrest. A third rapper named in the indictment, Christian Eppinger, was already locked up for shooting a police officer when he was slapped with additional charges for his alleged participation in the YSL gang. During a news conference, Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis cited the case as an example of the country's intolerance for crime, regardless of an individual's status of fame. 1. FCRA corruption case. In recent weeks, law enforcement officials from India's Central Bureau of Investigations, CBI, have raided 40 locations throughout the country as part of an ongoing investigation into the corruption of the country's Ministry of Home Affairs, MHA. 14 individuals have been arrested so far, including 6 officials from MHA's Foreigners Division, who allegedly helped NGOs, non-government organizations, illegally get clearance to operate. During the raids, detectives recovered many incriminating documents, cell phones, and other evidence pointing towards the suspect's guilt. 36 accused individuals have been named in the case, including 7 officials from the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, FCRA department, which provides clearances to NGOs. The operation was sophisticated, occurring at some of the highest levels of government and employing various middlemen who helped NGO clients get their backdoor FCRA registrations. And the scheme was a two-way street. The NGOs procured fake invoices for the division to justify any cost. Of course, the public servants who took part in the scam took bribes. Investigators caught at least 2 officials delivering and accepting bribes. More arrests followed the raids, and the suspects must now answer for their alleged crimes in court. Thanks for watching. Would you prefer to find out that a president you voted for illegally pocketed millions of dollars at the taxpayer's expense, or see a candidate you don't trust win an election? Let us know in the comments below.